Hi, everybody. Welcome to our session today. Good to see you all here. We'll be getting started in just a moment. We'll just be waiting for some more folks to join us. In the meantime, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, rename yourself so we can know what organization or where you're coming to us from. And as always, feel free to turn on cameras as it's nice to see people's faces as well. We'll be getting started in just a moment. Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Jenna Thoritz. I'm a senior program manager here at Humentum and really excited to be joined here today by thriving people, particularly by Andy Hicks and Simon Kenwright. And they're going to be walking us through surviving the storm, how to avoid the 5 common mistakes leaders make in times of crisis, which I know for many of us is unfortunately a very apt webinar in this time. And it doesn't matter if you're a leader in the formal sense or you lead, within your organizations. These are tips and reflections that I think we can all take forward in our work, especially as we move forward into reimagining and rebuilding, what is our current situation. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Andy and Simon. And please feel free to use the chat if you have questions, comments, reflections, and yeah, enjoy the webinar. All right, Simon and Andy, over to you.
Thanks, Jenna.
Thank you, Jenna. Hello, everyone, and welcome. First of all, a quick apology to anyone who showed up expecting us to be speaking in this last week. We're really sorry. There was a timing mix-up, as I'm sure you realised. Thank you for coming back. We hope you're doing okay. We recognise that many of you must be feeling quite exhausted and overwhelmed and anxious about the future, given all that's going on. We recognise that the funding crisis has left many of you fighting for survival, forcing you to navigate uncertainty and make tough decisions and try and support your teams, often while you're struggling to support yourself. Leadership in times of crisis isn't just about making the right strategic moves, of course. It's about how you show up for your people. And when trust is shaken, when levels of fear are skyrocketing and people are at the risk of burnout, strong, empathetic leadership is critical. And we may be great at this stuff when times are good, being inclusive, communicating effectively. But so often in times of crisis, we see that best practice start to ebb away, and this can cause lasting damage to both the organization and, of course, the people in it.
Over our 20 years working in the leadership and culture space, we have seen leaders and organizations fall into the same pitfalls again and again. And often we have then had to pick up the pieces afterwards. So our goal today is to help you to avoid them, so that your organization can not only survive the crisis, but build towards a sustainable future, and hopefully along the way, save you a lot of time, energy, and money. We'll explore how you can maintain trust, keep people engaged, and protect well-being, both for yourself and for your teams, even in the eye of the storm.
Of course, we can only do so much in the hour that we've got together today. So if what we cover resonates for you, we'll also be inviting you to a short program that will help you to hone your skills and develop frameworks and enable you to create a personal action plan that will help you to drive lasting change. And we'll share some more details about that later on.
As Jenna said, we are thriving people. We specialize in supporting purpose-driven organizations to strengthen their culture and their leadership, and their well-being, often in times of crisis. Our approach is about focusing on leaders and managers developing the resilience, the emotional intelligence, and the communication skills to build thriving cultures and thriving teams. We give them the skills to help them to develop trust even in the toughest times.
So, what we're going to do today? Well, we will be exploring the 5 most common mistakes that we see organizations making when times are tough. And then we'll be exploring some ideas for how we can avoid falling into these traps, making these mistakes, and some opportunities for further support should you need it. We'll then have time to discuss any reflections and answer any questions before we wrap things up. We want today to be as practical and as useful to you as it can be. And I think if you're able to contextualize some of the stuff that we're talking about, talk about some of the challenges that you're facing in your organizations, will help it to be as relevant to you guys as it possibly can be.
So what are these 5 mistakes? The first one is failing to align your leadership team behind a common strategy and communicate it in a consistent and transparent way. If you don't do that, it will damage trust and leave employees feeling confused, anxious, and often quite resentful.
Second mistake we see quite often is a complete disconnection between from the mission and the values. Sometimes leaders are so focused on driving that operational efficiency, on making those savings where they can, that it can create a disconnect from the mission or an apparent misalignment from the values, which of course is going to damage the reputation, is going to damage people's engagement, and ultimately damage the impact that you can make as an organization.
Third, we're often so wrapped up in firefighting that we can forget to include employees in our decision making, which means that they will feel isolated and powerless, most likely.
The fourth mistake we see is not supporting managers. The success of any change initiative in an organization stands and falls on the ability of your managers to be able to support their teams. And too often we see them lacking the skills that they need to engage people, particularly in times of crisis and change.
Finally, if we don't look after our well-being, if we don't provide support for our team's well-being, it's only going to increase the chances of there being high levels of stress, burnout, absenteeism, and it's going to make it much harder to drive through change.
So before we go into exploring some of the solutions, I'd love to hear from you. Do these mistakes resonate? Have you seen these within your own organizations or in the past? I know this is, probably the biggest crisis that many organizations have faced in the sector, but I know it's not the first. So I'd love to hear from you. Do feel free to either unmute yourself or to write in the chat. Do these resonate? Are there other mistakes that you see being made? Just love to give you a couple of minutes so we can explore that.
Yeah, I'll jump on. They certainly resonate. I think some of the other ones is the balance between oversharing and undersharing. I think you're saying a lack of clear and consistent leadership, which may be related. But, in times like this, it's hard to not communicate in a way that scares people and overstresses them. At the same time, not wanting to be seen as withholding information. So I think another mistake, or whether it's a mistake or I think for me, these 5 things aren't necessarily mistakes. They're just hard to get right. It's hard to get all of these things right. How can you balance your well-being when everyone wants you to be available to support them? I'm a CEO, to manage this, when that would mean you working, like 12-hour days repeatedly and over the weekends, because everyone's on reduced hours, the workload, everyone's stressed and rushing, banging against each other. And I think the human resource needs of people double at a time like this. So it's very hard to communicate priorities. So anyway, there's some other ones that I would put in. And I do agree. And I think you're right. Framing it as mistakes makes sense. But at the same time, I think it's these are really difficult ones to get right in the current environment. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Christy. That's really, really helpful. Absolutely. Yeah, they are. They're all difficult to get right. And I hope what we can, when we get into the 5 pillars, we hope we can give you some ideas around how you can do that, regardless of, you know, the budget that you have available for this. Any other reflections at this point from anybody?
I would say maybe, hi, I'm Karen. I'm talking to you from Haiti.
Hi, Karen.
So it's in times of crisis like that, break lines appear in the leadership. And it may exacerbate conflicts that were already there between the board and the CEO or within the management team. And so finding ways to manage the conflicts without letting them take up too much time is also, I think, I don't know, it's a mistake, but it's certainly a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen that with organizations we work with, that the cracks that were already there can become chasms in this sort of pressure cooker of a crisis happening. And because of all the chaos, it's even harder to address them in that situation, right? So it's like, how do you address some of the long-standing problems and the new problems of the crisis? Is it kind of like that?
Yes, that's exactly it.
Mm. And I guess maybe it sounds too optimistic, but I think there is something here about like there is opportunity in crisis. There are lots of things that would have been good maybe to have changed in the past, but we sort of brush them under the carpet a bit. There is some opportunity to actually deal with some things that maybe we've been avoiding in a situation like this and make some longer term changes.
So let's get our sleeves up and get stuck in to actually looking at some of the solutions to these challenges. It's all too easy to dwell in the problems because we know, but we know them all too well, right? So let's explore some of the solutions. We're going to share the 5 pillars of effective leadership in times of crisis as we've encountered them over the course of our work. Some of them might sound obvious to you, but I think it's important to highlight them because it's amazing how often they're just not happening. It's all too easy to know what to do, but actually doing what we know, as we've already highlighted, could be much more of a challenge. So after we explore each one, we'll try and distill it into one bottom line, one thing that you can take away and do differently in order to better ensure your success. And then we'll also be opening the floor to you to explore any barriers, the kinds of things that might be getting in the way of you being able to put this into practice in your organizations. So Andy, what's the first pillar?
During times of crisis, people need clarity. We were recently called in to support a global NGO based in London who were having to reduce their workforce by about 25%. Initially, the team's communication about the redundancy process had frankly been disastrous. What was already a very painful and difficult situation had been made worse by the fact that there was a lack of clarity about what was happening, when and why. Leaders were saying contradictory things, and there was a lot of suspicion about information that was being withheld, not shared with the wider team. And the result of all of that was morale and trust in the leadership had plummeted, and a lot of people who hadn't been made redundant were seriously considering quitting.
As Corinne highlighted just then, during restructures, leaders are going to have strong emotions. There's going to be different perspectives on what should be prioritized. But it's really, really, really important that these can be aired and resolved in private rather than risking those mixed messages seeping out and leaders undermining each other and creating confusion and trust will just start to ebb away. So that's why whenever we're working with an organization facing change, we'll always, always, always advocate for running a facilitated leadership alignment workshop before anything is communicated to the wider team. This helps leaders to agree on a narrative framework. How are they going to be positioning the changes? What's the rationale that they can all get behind? And to the point that we were just talking about, it also provides an opportunity for them to talk honestly about their own concerns, their own challenges, and hopefully get to a point of resolution, of common understanding, of a commonly agreed approach. The challenge is for lots of organizations try to facilitate this stuff internally, and it doesn't necessarily give the equity of voice or the psychological safety for people to be able to speak freely, which is why we'd always advocate where possible to try and get external facilitator in to enable you to make sure that everyone can feel heard and that strong emotions can be properly managed.
So the bottom line is, before communicating any major changes, align your leadership team so they agree on a clear, consistent message. So maybe that sounds easier said than done. What might get in the way of that leadership team having that clear, consistent message and being able to agree? In your experience, maybe something that's happening in your organization now or an organization you worked in previously.
Okay, feel free to unmute yourself or to write in the chat, whatever's easiest for you.
I can jump in while others are thinking. I think sometimes it's just the pure pace of change and just things are moving so fast and there's incomplete information. And I think as someone mentioned earlier, the balance of getting something out, as Christy's saying in the chat, the balance of getting something out versus like really having the time to think it through when the pace of change is just so fast.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Totally get that. You're already in the middle of it before you've had a chance to actually think about, oh, what's our strategy here? What's the best way of doing it? For sure. I guess the purpose of a session like today is to just to try and just highlight the importance of this stuff, because if you don't, you end up wasting so much more time further down the line just trying to correct course and to belatedly trying to align people when so much of the damage is already done. So yeah, I mean, again, don't want to sit in an idealistic cloud, but where we can, advocate for some best practice where there is the opportunity for getting leaders together, we really, really encourage it.
Yeah, that's helpful, Laura. Like tensions that already existed, like everyone considering their department a priority, that already being a tension that existed, that just gets exacerbated in when crisis hits. And they'd rather everyone else had their budget cut. So it's almost like everyone's got their own little island that they're protecting. Yeah, very, very common challenge to have that gets in the way of having this alignment and clear voice. Yeah, and I think it's also worth emphasizing as well, like the unprecedented speed of change that's happened with the USAID makes it harder than it's ever been before to do these kinds of things, because we're not used to things changing this quickly. So we have to think more deeply, take more care out of how to respond to this with a consistent voice with this unprecedented pace of change.
Let's move on to the second pillar. That is around ensuring mission and values alignment. And I think whatever you're going through, it's critical that how it's communicated aligns with the mission, aligns with the values of the organization. While cutting costs and improving efficiency, that's obviously essential at times. If people perceive you to be doing that at the expense of your mission, they can start to question your integrity, and trust can fracture quite easily in those circumstances. And it's not just internally, of course, it's easy for donors and other stakeholders to feel let down if they feel like your actions are contradicting, your stated values as an organization. Recently, we were called in to support a team where, an organization where the team had felt betrayed. It was an organization that advocated for human rights, and yet their own staff ended up feeling quite dehumanized by a poorly handled restructure, and it had massive implications. And when we're called into to work with people belatedly, there's so much more work for us to do than if these things have been borne in mind a little bit earlier on.
So what we try to do, what we make sure we do when we're brought in early enough, is ensure that all comms is filtered through a clear mission and values lens, so that there's a real genuine and consistent voice that lines up with the ethos of the organization. For example, one of our clients' values was inclusive and making sure that everyone's voice is respected. So we helped them to develop a strategy to ensure that all their comms felt two-way and that people were looped in early and often. So how do we do that? Well, we had regular facilitated forums and an anonymous suggestion box, so people felt it was safe to voice their feelings and perspectives on the change process. Also, consistent communication that underlined how the changes enabled the mission to continue, even if that means losing people or budgets being cut. This is being done in service of our continuing to deliver the work that we're here to do.
So the bottom line on this pillar, just before any announcements are made or taking any decisions about the restructure, ask yourselves, how does this align with our mission, with our values? What might get in the way? What might be the challenges of that? What have you encountered in your organizations?
For me, this is Christy. I think some of the challenges, we have a lot of equity and inclusion values, but our business development team, we decided would stay full time and other staff had to cut back because that would then grow the firm, right? So then is that equity? How do you balance the firm needs with some of those values when survival is so dire that you can't actually fulfill all of those values? And how do you know as a leader that you're choosing which values trump others? Like, I think the organization has to come first when times are bad, or else the whole ship goes down. But the tension between getting that right, no one's going to do it properly or the same as others. So I think it's not, when times are this bad, it's actually really hard to do this.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's like when you're having to cut budgets and you're having to let certain people go, doing that whilst meeting the need or trying to preserve the value of inclusion feels really impossible. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yep, definitely.
Yeah.
And the whole it's anti-inclusion, the whole collateral damage philosophy that somebody has to be effective for the rest, but that is actually the only way the firm will survive if that is what happens, because there is no alternative. So it just feels like it's the best of a bad bunch, really, is what I'm trying to say. And that doesn't always align with the vision and mission.
No.
Absolutely hear what you're saying, Christy. I guess just another perspective on it is, in terms of the meaning of the term equity, the meaning of the term inclusion. I think there are obviously nuances within that, and I guess one interpretation of equity is a sense of fairness. And so even depending on whichever side of the line you fall on when cuts are being made, is there the feeling that you're being treated fairly with respect? Is there the feeling that people are being included in the decision-making process. Does that make sense?
Yes, but at the same time, is it even fair to ask staff to vote on who else should be fired and let go of? I don't think that is aligning with our values either.
No.
Right? And
No,
this is my point, that
no, yes.
it's an impossible situation to get it all right at the moment. There is not, the values cannot all be adhered to at the moment and the firm survive. So it would be, the decision is, everyone, does the firm just close down now? Or would you like us to do our best bet to keep the largest number of people employed, as opposed to which people do we need to fire?
Yeah. I guess what we would say is that it's communicating that when you are letting people go, it is in service of the mission ultimately. Because if the whole organization folds, then you're not fulfilling any of it. Even though that's painful for the ones who actually are, as you say, the collateral damage. It doesn't seem like you're including them. But it's difficult, it's painful, and there's no easy way of doing it. I just wanted to respond as well to Aisa. Is it? I'm not sure if I'm saying it right. Aisa.
I was going to just flag that, Andy, and we can perhaps come back to that when we talk about the well-being piece.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. So let's move on and explore the third pillar, and that's empathic, inclusive leadership. A few years ago, we were working with a client whose main funder suddenly, out of nowhere, pulled all of their backing. Much like you've experienced now. And for them, it was again a very challenging time, an existential crisis. Could they even survive? But they had a really remarkable CEO. Instead of panicking and falling into that sense of doom, he saw it as an opportunity to pivot the organization around a new digital first strategy. He knew, of course, that the new direction would have the potential to be impactful, but it also meant a huge amount of change in terms of roles, in terms of remits, in terms of skill sets up and down the organization. He was aware that people were going to feel anxious about this and uncertain about such a large shift in focus. He wanted to ensure that they felt included in the changes, that they were part of the solution, and it wasn't something that was being imposed on them. And so he brought us in to work with him and the leadership team to create an inclusive program of change that gave managers the skills to ensure that people felt heard, that they felt there was a structure in place to be able to influence decisions and to help them to decide, what skills they might need to be able to thrive in this new digital first environment.
Sadly, not all leaders are so naturally empathetic. In one organization we encountered that was going through a painful round of redundancies, there was an attitude of one particular leader of a rather cold, well, they just need to accept reality and get on with it. And we also shadowed a call where they were letting their team know what the redundancy process was going to be, how it was going to unfold. And it was just done in a way that didn't leave any space for emotion, or really communicated a sense of care for the team and how they were going to be receiving what she was saying. So if we don't communicate with empathy as a leader, then we risk making the whole process that we're trying to drive harder and driving up resentment and damaging trust. Empathy isn't a soft skill. It's not a nice to have. It's a must have. And it's an essential quality to build engagement through a change process.
So how can we help leaders become more empathetic? Well, first of all, if they're not in touch with their own emotions, they're going to struggle. They're going to struggle to recognize and respond to the other emotions of other people. So first of all, it's important to help them to develop skills in terms of that self-connection piece, that mindfulness piece. And they can do that through working with a coach, or through internal conversations about the need for this stuff and how important it is. And then secondly, it's around providing the platforms and forums for them to really listen to the perspectives of the wider teams to ensure that people feel heard and recognized. And within these forums, of course, it's critical that leaders don't come across as defensive, which is what we see quite often. If that's just the fast track to destroying trust, they've really got to learn to listen with humility.
So that is the bottom line. Ask your team how they feel and really listen. So again, what might be the barriers of doing that within your organization? Asking people how they feel and actually listening in a non-defensive way, a non-problem solving way, but just making them feel really heard in a time of crisis.
Yeah, I was just thinking the barrier might be increasing burnout for the managers who are listening.
Yeah.
Hearing everyone complain about their life challenges and the impact it's having on kids' school fees, mortgage payments, sick relatives, and that increases burnout for those managers who are doing the listening could be one barrier. The other barrier is that it could increase complaints. It could increase a complaint culture as well. So I think it depends on how it's listened to and by whom.
Yeah, absolutely true. And we've definitely seen that happen, or that managers have really wanted to listen and be there for their team, but it's ended up with them feeling exhausted and kind of resentful that they spend hours and hours listening to their team's woes. So it definitely is important how you go about it and with what intention, and that you develop the right listening skills and the ability to have boundaries before throwing yourself into something like that, because it can just be really, really draining. And yeah, absolutely, potentially just create a culture of people unloading more, complaining more, and not actually not actually being very productive.
Maybe two things for us here in Haiti. One is just finding the time, making the time to build these kind of discussions in when everybody's already completely overworked. That's one. The other one would be logistics. We have about 170 employees, but they work in about 10 areas all over the country. And these days in Haiti, you just cannot travel around. So we rely a lot on technology, but I don't need to tell you, having a real heartfelt conversation over Zoom is that easy. So there's quite a few logistics challenges too. Yeah, that would be it for me.
Yeah. So when you're in crisis mode, when there's a million and one things to do every day, to sit down and have a heart to heart, especially over a dodgy internet connection, is much easier said than done. Yeah, totally get that. I guess what we would advocate for is it doesn't necessarily have to mean spending hours and hours talking to everyone, but even if just for a couple of minutes, you connect in a genuine way where that person has a sense that their manager really cares or their leadership really cares how they are and actually wants to hear, that can be enough. It doesn't have to be a 2-hour Zoom call. It's just that sense of this person in front of me, this leader, this manager really cares how I'm doing. And that sometimes makes a real difference to people.
And sometimes that's just about using the language, just using the words, I really care about how this is impacting you and want to be here to support you if in any way that I can. Doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's going to come and beat your door down, but just letting them know that there is facility for that, or that the intention is there, the recognition of what they're going through is there. We just need, sometimes we just need to be seen. We just need people to know that we're suffering, we're going through a tough time. So should we move on to the pillar number 4?
Yeah. So ensuring managers have the skills to support their teams through periods of change is critical. They're often the ones under the most pressure, the ones expected to have the most challenging conversations, and there's a lot riding on those conversations going well. One organization we worked with recently needed to make a big round of redundancies and redesign a lot of the roles. Previous change initiatives hadn't gone very well, and the managers weren't feeling very confident about their ability to see this one through. And so the HRD called us in. They saw the potential risks, and we helped the managers to build their skills to be able to deliver the change to help people to embrace the change that was happening. And this was through enabling them to have more skills with having difficult conversations and learning how to deal with challenging emotions.
I mean, of course, we recognize, management development can be expensive, but there are also more cost-effective ways of doing it. There's a whole load of resources available online now. There's obviously AI as well can be really, really helpful in terms of helping people to get new perspectives and to frame things in the right way. Often when budgets are small, we work alongside HR teams to provide them with the frameworks and the resources for them to be able to roll out initiatives internally as well, which obviously becomes a lot more cost effective.
So the bottom line is ask your managers what support they need to deal with the restructure. Find out from them. You're not necessarily going to know already. Ask them what they need. And even if it's something that you don't have huge amounts of time and money to provide, already just by asking, you're showing that they care, that you care.
Any barriers, any challenges, or any particular skills gaps that you can perceive in your own organizations? You recognize how challenging it is for managers they're the ones that are stuck in the middle trying to execute the plans of leadership, and the ones that are having to have these really challenging conversations at times with, of course, with empathy, with care. If they get it right, then they can bring people with them. If they get it wrong, then it's very, very easy for them to alienate people even further.
I can jump in as a manager myself. This one particularly resonates with me. I think so much of it continues to go back to that point about how emotional these kinds of incidences and the climate that we're living in right now can be. And it's, I think, really hard sometimes for managers straddling that line between, needing to be a communicator of what the organization is doing, what the direction is, while also managing your own emotions and your own uncertainty and your own grief. And just really trying to hold all of that and all those different roles together. I think that's something that managers need support on, but then again, it's almost like you don't even know what to ask for in that instance, what kind of support can be provided in that instance. So yeah, that's just my reflections on that.
But as leaders, perhaps there's a way that we can be a bit more proactive in sharing what resources we have available. There's a smorgasbord. There's a program here or an AI just line of questioning that perhaps might be useful at this point, or obviously if there are the opportunities for more face-to-face conversations and support, then so be it. But maybe it is just as from a leadership perspective, it's being proactive of if people don't know what they don't know, perhaps we need to help them to identify that.
Yeah, it totally makes sense that a manager might not necessarily know what support they need, but maybe just asking how they're doing, what they're finding challenging at the moment can evolve into working out what some support might look like.
So let's move on to the final pillar. And whenever organizations are going through change, it's almost inevitably going to lead to higher levels of uncertainty, higher levels of stress. And of course, that's exactly what we saw in one crisis hit NGO we were working with recently. Many of the leaders were struggling, they were stressed, they were exhausted, they were feeling isolated because they were unsure, or didn't feel able to share the details of what was coming, and they were kind of stuck in the middle. So they in that process, they were also neglecting many of the things that they would usually do to take care of themselves, both physically and mentally. And when, of course, leaders and managers aren't looking after their own well-being, it's so much harder for them to support their teams. They'll either avoid it altogether, or they'll try to provide that sympathetic ear, but as we've already highlighted, end up feeling drained, end up feeling resentful, because they're not in a strong enough place themselves.
Where possible, coaching can be a really valuable support here. It can help managers to build their resilience, and that makes them more able to support others. Coaching doesn't have to be expensive. It can be resourced internally. A lot of organizations, there are many people who are trained coaches. Group coaching is also more cost effective and often no less powerful. And then there's so many other routes. There's mental health hotlines, stress management workshops, flexible working options, career guidance and support, so that people feel that if they are going to be made redundant, at least they're being supported through that process and shown some care. By having a proactive approach to managing your mental health, your team will have more energy to navigate the change process and deliver on the mission, rather than just being consumed by stress.
And just to link back to the point that Isa made in the chat a little earlier, I'd love to hear a little bit more from you, Isa. Sorry, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Please correct me if I'm not. But I'd love to hear about the implications. What happened as a result of that more hands-on approach that was taken by your organization. Are you there, Isa? Maybe not. Well, either way, it sounds great. It sounds very much like ICE's organization is doing a lot of the stuff that we talked about. You're in a very noisy place. Thank you for coming back to me. Sorry to hear that you're in a very noisy place. But no, it's really reassuring to hear that stuff's happening. It can be so important. And to Andy's point, this stuff doesn't have to cost lots of money. Just letting your team know that you care about their well-being and asking them what they need in terms of support can sometimes be enough. So what might get in the way of that one? Any thoughts from the group?
I'd like to jump in here because I struggle with this one quite a bit. I think sometimes well-being often gets used at the same time as, for example, work-life balance.
Mm-hmm.
And especially during times of crisis, that's really hard because we oftentimes the problem is actual overwork, and you can't really square that circle. If you're doing more with less, you can't say, well, go take a break because the work has to get done. So at the same, oftentimes when I talk to people and they're talking about work-life balance, they're talking about burnout or well-being, they're really saying, I have too much to do and not enough resources or time to do it. And so what I've started to think about though is this idea of the importance of self-regulation, that it's kind of like putting on the oxygen mask. It's almost like a radical idea that oftentimes we think of prioritizing well-being as being selfish because the work is so important and the impact of not doing the work we think is so important. But I've started to try and reframe it as well-being being a radical act of self-preservation instead of like lighting a candle and being nice to myself, and seeing how that kind of mental shift changes things.
I love that. Yeah. I like it shouldn't need
Lloyd.
to be thought of as a radical act, should it? But sometimes it does. I think I think from we're kind of talking about a lot of there's different level elements of this in terms of the well-being, isn't it? Obviously there is that caring for our own well-being fundamental. But I think there's also that recognition, if we're talking to leaders, particularly, is that in that recognition, I think the language you used there was, well, the work just needs to get done. But I think there needs to be, that the idea of having to do more with less, there needs to be that recognition at leadership level about quite what that means for people on the ground. And is it that deadlines need to be pushed out, or jobs need to be redesigned in order to enable people to manage their well-being? Because otherwise it does just sound like a nice to have rather than a true recognition of what people need to be able to survive through this time. So it's about having that more holistic view on, not just what needs to be done, but what's feasible, what's realistic. And if what we're asking people to do isn't realistic, then how do we redesign what we're doing in order to make it that way?
And I think it links back to what we were saying earlier about existing problems being exacerbated. That works both. That's true both at an organizational level, but also an individual level. So if you already had a tendency to neglect yourself, not look after yourself very well, to overwork, that's only going to be amplified massively in the situation of a crisis. And obviously, if you burn out, then you'll know you're not actually doing the thing that you want to do, serving the organization and delivering on your mission. So I think I do quite like the idea of it's a radical act of self-preservation. It's also like reframing it to this is part of being able to deliver on the mission is you being well, is you having energy and being healthy. You can't separate it. You can't think, well, I can sacrifice myself because these people that I'm serving are more important. You have to be looking after both, otherwise you're not able to serve those stakeholders.
I was going to say, just one thing. Audre Lloyd is the one who has that quote about it being a radical act of self-preservation, and it's fantastic. And I think what you're saying is great in terms of, are things working the way they should be working, but that doesn't help in times of crisis. That's like, okay, so great, things weren't working the way they should be working, and now we know that middle of a crisis. So now once we eventually do recover, we can hire a consultant who can help us fix those particular problems. But then it's, real tensions between needing a leader and a manager who can support their team. Like, I broke my wrist 2 weeks ago. Really a lot of pain, needed surgery. People wanted a strong leader when everyone was being fired and going down part-time. So me taking time off to deal with that pain would have caused a wildfire. People needed to have questions answered immediately. And I think that what you're saying is great and theoretically very strong. But like you said, this is unprecedented times where these kinds of decisions, there's not one right way. Either way has a knock-on effect. Yes, I did get grumpy with people, very unfortunately. Yes, I beat myself up for that. And then I went, but hang on a minute. What were you going to do? Not be there? Come back when you didn't have any pain? Like, it just sucks. Sorry, there's just not good options here. And yeah, hindsight, great. Yes, take time off. Let everyone deal with the stress of not having a strong leader and come back when you're not in any pain. Next time I'm in this situation, I may take that choice. But you have to go through it, because no one's really been in this situation to say it is better right then, in the middle of an absolute crisis, to take a week off because you're in pain. Like, And I don't think even anyone on the call could say for sure what the best option is in that situation. And yeah, sure, if I'm a bit tired one week, I'll take a day off. I'll take some time off. I'll recoup. I'll talk to myself, I'll be positive. I'll go for a massage, all of that. But when it's crisis upon crisis, the scenarios and the options change, and it's just very hard anyway.
Yeah, it is. It is really, really hard. And you're right. There are a lot of these things that would have been better to have done 10 years ago rather than in the middle of a crisis. And one of the fears that we have about sharing these things is like, okay, well, that's all very well, but how do I do this with no money, no time, and another bomb exploding every 5 minutes? Yeah, it is just really a terribly difficult situation. What we're trying to do is break these things down into like what is a micro thing that you can do today if you haven't put these things in practice long ago. What's a very small thing you can do to look after your own well-being? What's a small thing you can do to check in with your manager? Just ask how they are so that you're doing something. But we also really want to acknowledge that these things are, there's no right way, there's no easy way. It's a very, very impossible situation. We do need to move on just because we've got a little bit more to share with you before the end.
Is that a quick question, Corinne, or?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to quickly share also, I think when we're in crisis situation like that, you develop tunnel vision. And what I know is that I tend at that time not to reach out to my colleagues and to the others around me who can actually really help. So it's reminding myself also that I'm not alone in this kind of mess.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think it's so true, and that's that's why we're trying to to throw out some ideas for you today, and just to kind of remind you of some of the stuff that nothing that we've shared today is rocket science, is it? But it's about as Andy said, what are the small steps that we can do in order to be able to kind of help us to pull back and see the bigger picture again. And so that's those are the 5 pillars that we've shared, and that to help you to see what you need to do. And in a moment, we'll hopefully have a little bit of time for questions, but we're running a little bit short on time now. But first of all, I'd love to just share with you an opportunity really that you've got that we can invite you to, that will help you to make a clear, concrete next step to be able to keep those reminders front and center, and develop your capacity to deal with the crisis in real time.
Because the real challenge, as we've talked about, it's not just knowing the theory, it's actually how do you do this when the crisis is happening? How do you handle those tough conversations? How do you make those difficult decisions and take your team with you? So that's what we're offering to support you with through a 4-week program, which we call Leading in a Time of Crisis. It's 2 hours a week investment to enable you to hone the powerful resilience and emotional intelligence skills you're going to need to handle this unprecedented situation in the best way possible. It's going to include case studies, tried and tested solutions so that you can create a clear, practical plan to implement in your organization. In our organization, in our experience, when leaders are in the thick of it, like we've mentioned, it's really valuable difficult to do, but valuable to take a step back and think, what do I need to do here? What's the best strategy for me to put into place to deal with this crisis? And how do I actually do that rather than being caught up in constant firefighting? So if today's session resonated, just think what could be possible with more in-depth practical guidance, the opportunity to troubleshoot some of the things that we've talked about why it's difficult to do these things in practice with some like-minded leaders.
So the program's for you if you are worried about the future of your organization, if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you want to be the best, calmest, steadiest leader amid all the uncertainty. Often there's so many different conflicting opinions in the mix and how we should deal with this as well. So this will help you to clarify the strategy and also to take care of yourself Even if you've been busy taking care of everybody else, obviously it's ourselves that can often get lost in the mix. So what do the 4 weeks look like?
It's a modular program, 2 4-hour workshops over the course of a month.
What, 4 2-hour workshops, Sandy?
What did I say?
2 4.
4 2-hour workshops, 4 2 hours workshops over the course of a month. The first one, as we've discussed, in times of certainty, your team needs clear, consistent leadership. So the first module is about learning how to communicate decisively, align your team, and prevent confusion that erodes trust.
Yeah, as we've talked about, strong leaders are able to stay grounded under pressure. So module 2 is about developing those practical strategies to help you manage your own stress and support your own team's well-being.
Crisis brings really tough conversations. Module 3 is about mastering the skills to handle them with honesty, empathy, and authority. We'll be exploring how to navigate resistance, diffuse tension, and keep people engaged.
And finally, module 4 is about turning insight into action. So we'll be helping you to create a clear strategy for your next steps, ensuring that you and your team can stay focused and resilient and ready for what's ahead. It's about building, it's about giving you the clarity so that you can prioritize. It's about helping you build your resilience. It's about building confidence of being able to do this well, giving you the tools that you need, the frameworks that you need, and of course, not to be underestimated, that strong support network of leaders. So just before we run off, just a couple of logistics.
Yeah, so with 4 2-hour sessions starting on the 3rd of April, times we tried to make it work for different time zones to be inclusive. If these times don't work for you, get in touch and we'll see what we can explore in terms of alternatives.
In terms of costs, we try to keep it as affordable as possible. You can see the breakdown there. We've also designed the pricing model to make it more cost effective to bring more members of your team. The more people you bring, the easier it'll be to build alignment. So everyone's singing off the same hymn sheet. And we recognize how busy you are, that we know that times are tight, and we know that if we put things off, we end up prioritizing other stuff. So we want to give you an incentive to sign up now. So it's a further 10% off if you want to come and you want to sign up by the end of this week. Andy will put the link in the chat for more details and to sign up. And of course, if you wanted to run a program like this in-house, or if you wanted to discuss any of your organization's specific challenges, we're also offering a free 30-minute call to be able to explore the best approach for you. So Andy has also put the link for those to book a slot for that in the chat already. So that just about brings us to the end, right on cue. Sorry we haven't had a lot of time for questions. I'd love to just leave you with one of our favorite quotes. I think this really just captures what it means to be resilient. Life's always going to throw curveballs at you. There's nothing you can do about that. But what we can do is develop the skills to handle those stressful situations better. So we'd love to be able to support you in any of that. We recognize the challenges that you're up against, and we really thank you for coming and joining us today. If you've got any questions or any thoughts, please do reach out. We'd love to keep the conversation going.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Andy. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Glad to hear in the chat that so many folks found this event helpful. And we'll be following up with the recording and all of the great links. And in the meantime, stay well. And we'll see you in the next event. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.